Though renowned for its panzer divisions and so-called Blitzkrieg tactics, Germany entered the Second World War with only a modest capacity to mass-produce tanks. During the early campaigns, a significant portion of German armored strength relied on the poorly armed and lightly armored Panzer I and Panzer II. While useful for training, reconnaissance, and against infantry, they were ill-suited for fighting enemy tanks. The more capable Panzer III and Panzer IV were also designed, but their production before the war remained limited and was only just beginning to ramp up. Germany's occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1939 helped partially solve this problem. Along with the country's industrial base, Germans also gained access to a number of modern Czech-designed tanks, including the Škoda LT Pz.Kpfw.Tuermen. After entering German service, the vehicle was redesignated the Panzer 35T, with T standing for Tschechisch, meaning Czech. In total, the Germans confiscated 244 of these tanks and made extensive use of them during the early years of the war. Following the Anschluss of Austria in March 1938, Germany, under Adolf Hitler's leadership, turned its attention to neighboring Czechoslovakia. Hitler was particularly interested in annexing the Sudetenland, a border region with a large ethnic German population. With the acquiescence of Britain and France, the Munich Agreement was signed in September 1938, effectively granting Germany permission to do just that. German expansion, however, did not stop there. In March 1939, the remainder of Czechoslovakia was dismantled. The Czech lands were occupied by Germany and reorganized into the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, while Slovakia became a nominally independent German client state. Along with these territorial gains, Germany also acquired Czechoslovakia's substantial military-industrial base. The country possessed one of the most advanced arms industry in Europe, most notably Škoda Works, a company renowned for producing high-quality artillery, armored vehicles, and other military equipment. In the years preceding the German occupation, Škoda had been developing a new light tank in the hope of securing a production contract from the Czechoslovak army. Following a lengthy development period, the company produced the relatively modern LT Pz.Kpfw.Tuermen. After successfully completing field trials, this vehicle was accepted into service, and in late 1935, the Czechoslovakian government placed an order for nearly 300 tanks. The design also achieved success on the export market. Romania purchased 126 examples, while 10 vehicles originally intended for Afghanistan were ultimately sold to Bulgaria. In mid-March 1939, shortly after the German occupation of Czechoslovakia, a German military delegation visited the Škoda works to conduct a detailed examination of the LT Pz.Kpfw.Tuermen. Following a thorough evaluation, the tank was deemed suitable for German service, and approximately 244 available vehicles were taken over by the Wehrmacht. The transfer of these tanks to German control began the following month. Not all of the vehicles were in serviceable condition. Some required only minor repairs, while others had become so worn that they were considered suitable only for training duties. Several examples were dispatched to the Kummersdorf Training Center for detailed evaluation. In January 1940, following instructions issued by the Inspectorate of Motorized Troops, the vehicle received the official designation Panzerkampfwagen 35T, commonly shortened to Panzer 35T. Although the Panzer 35T largely retained its original design, a number of modifications were introduced to bring it into line with German standards. Most visibly, all vehicles were repainted in the standard dark gray camouflage used by the Wehrmacht at the time. A no-tech blackout driving light was installed on the left front fender, while an additional light was fitted to the rear of the vehicle. A new 2-meter rod antenna was mounted to the left of the radio operator's observation port to accommodate German radio equipment. Finally, external stowage bins and jerry can mounts were sometimes added around the engine compartment. The most significant changes were made inside the vehicle. In its original Czechoslovak configuration, the LT Pz.Kpfw.Tuermen had a crew of only 3 men. The driver was seated on the right side of the hull, with the radio operator positioned opposite him. The commander was the sole occupant of the turret and was burdened with multiple responsibilities. In addition to leading the vehicle, he was required to observe the battlefield, identify targets, load the main gun, aim, and fire it. This severely reduced the tank's combat effectiveness and placed an excessive workload on a single crewman. To alleviate this problem, Germans introduced a 4th crew member to the turret who served as a dedicated loader. Another important improvement was the installation of an intercom system. The original Czechoslovak vehicle lacked internal communication equipment, forcing the crew to rely on a system of indicator lights and hand signals to communicate between the hull and the turret. The addition of an intercom greatly improved coordination and situational awareness, making the tank easier to operate in combat. The main armament of the Panzer 35T was the 3.7 cm Škoda UV VZ34 semi-automatic gun. Its anti-armor performance was nearly identical to that of a German 37 mm gun, making it a potent anti-tank weapon. In the original Czechoslovakian service, the ammunition load comprised 24 armor-piercing and 54 high-explosive rounds. However, after being adopted by the Germans, this was reduced to 72 rounds to accommodate an additional crew member in the turret. Secondary armament consisted of two 7.92 mm MG37T machine guns, the German designation for the Czechoslovak ZB VZ37. One machine gun was mounted coaxially with the main armament, while the second was installed in the hull front. In Czechoslovak service, the tank carried 2,700 rounds of machine gun ammunition, though this had to be reduced to 1,800 rounds after entering German service. The front of both the hull and turret was protected by 25 mm of armor, considerably more than that found on early German tanks at the time, which typically featured no more than 15 mm of frontal protection. The sides and rear were less heavily armored, at just 16 mm thick. For added protection, the Panzer 35T was sometimes equipped with the Nebelkerzen-Abwurfvorrichtung, a smoke grenade rack system mounted at the rear of the hull. This device housed 5 smoke grenades, which the commander could deploy via a wire-controlled mechanism. The Germans saw little reason to replace the 120 horsepower Škoda T11 6-cylinder engine. With a combat weight of 10.5 tons, the tank could reach a maximum speed of 35 km per hour, which was deemed sufficient. The first German unit to be equipped with the Panzer 35T was the 65th Panzer Battalion, which received 64 tanks in June 1939. The following month, another 122 vehicles were issued to the 11th Panzer Regiment. Over the next several weeks, both formations conducted extensive training exercises to familiarize the crews with the operation and capabilities of their newly acquired tanks. When Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, the 11th Panzer Regiment and the 65th Panzer Battalion were issued to the 1st Light Division, which was tasked with advancing toward Warsaw. On the 12th of September, Panzer 35T tanks played a key role in the encirclement of Polish forces near the town of Radom. On the same day, the unit lost 2 tanks while attempting to dislodge Polish defenders near the village of Studzianki. On the 18th of September 1939, elements of the 1st Light Division entered the Kampinos Forest east of Warsaw, where they ran into a well-prepared Polish ambush. During the ensuing engagement, the Germans lost at least 2 or 3 Panzer 35T tanks. Some accounts attribute the destruction of those vehicles to a single TKS tankette armed with a 20mm autocannon and commanded by Roman Edmund Orlik. Nevertheless, German forces eventually overcame all Polish resistance and continued their advance. By the end of September 1939, the campaign had concluded with a German victory. The intense fighting inevitably resulted in losses among the Panzer 35T units. Determining the exact number of tanks lost, however, is difficult. Different sources provide widely varying figures, ranging from as few as 11 vehicles to as many as 115. The number of total write-offs is equally disputed, with estimates varying from a single tank to as many as 69. Such discrepancies are difficult to reconcile and likely stem from differing methods of recording combat losses, damaged vehicles, and tanks later returned to service. Despite these inconsistencies, most sources agree that mechanical failures accounted for a large proportion of the Panzer 35T's losses during the campaign. Polish forces possessed relatively few armored vehicles, and fewer still faced off against the 1st Light Division. Additionally, the Panzer 35T's 25mm frontal armor was sufficient to resist fire from Polish anti-tank rifles and 20mm autocannons. However, it remained vulnerable to the standard Polish 37mm anti-tank gun, which was capable of penetrating even the tank's frontal armor at most combat ranges. Following the Polish campaign, a temporary stalemate developed on the Western Front, as both Germany and the Western Allies prepared for the next phase of the war. The Wehrmacht used this period to reorganize its forces and implement lessons learned during the invasion of Poland. One of the conclusions drawn from the campaign was that the light divisions had failed to fully meet expectations. As a result, these formations were reorganized into panzer divisions. The 1st Light Division, for example, was redesignated as the 6th Panzer Division. By the spring of 1940, the division fielded 118 Panzer 35T tanks, including between 8 and 14 command variants. Its strength was further bolstered by the addition of 60 Panzer II tanks and 31 Panzer IV tanks. Interestingly, at least 6 Panzer 35T tanks were reportedly transferred to the SS at the end of 1939. The exact reasons for this transfer, as well as the ultimate fate of these vehicles, remain unclear. It is possible that they were used for training purposes. For the German invasion of Western Europe, the 6th Panzer Division was assigned a key role in the planned breakthrough through the Ardennes in May 1940. After penetrating the Allied defenses, it joined other German mobile formations in a rapid advance toward the English Channel, with the objective of cutting off Allied forces in Belgium and the Netherlands. The initial advance through the Ardennes was hampered by traffic congestion, difficult terrain, and logistical delays, but the gamble ultimately succeeded. On the 16th of May, the command staff of the 11th Panzer Regiment came under French artillery fire near Brunehamel. During the engagement, 1 tank was lost to French fire. The following day, near the French town of Guise, the division again ran into the Allied resistance. After a brief skirmish, 2 French tanks were destroyed by German Panzer 35Ts. By the 4th of June 1940, after covering a distance of 130 kilometers, the 6th Panzer Division temporarily halted to allow its crews to rest and its vehicles to undergo much-needed maintenance and repairs. A week later, on the 11th of June, the division participated in the German assault on the Wagen line. The final recorded loss of Panzer 35T during the campaign occurred on the 21st of June, when a vehicle was knocked out by French anti-tank gunfire. Following the conclusion of the Western campaign, the Germans increasingly viewed the Panzer 35T as an obsolete design. Nevertheless, the tank was not immediately withdrawn from service. Germany was still struggling to produce sufficient numbers of the more modern Panzer III and Panzer IV, forcing the Wehrmacht to continue relying on older vehicles such as the Panzer 35T. By the time Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the 6th Panzer Division fielded between 149 and 155 operational tanks, including between 5 and 11 command variants of the Panzer 35T. In addition, German depots held roughly 50 more vehicles. Most of these reserve tanks were either heavily worn from previous campaigns or had been written off and retained as sources of spare parts to keep operational vehicles running. During the opening stages of Operation Barbarossa, the 6th Panzer Division was tasked with advancing through the Baltic states toward Leningrad. In the first days of the campaign, it became heavily involved in the Battle of Ryazany, where German forces unexpectedly encountered the new Soviet KV-1 and KV-2 heavy tanks. Against these formidable opponents, the Panzer 35T's 3.7cm gun proved completely ineffective. On the 15th of July, elements of the 6th Panzer Division engaged a force of approximately 25 Soviet tanks. Following the battle, German reports credited the unit with the destruction of 8 enemy tanks and damage to 4 more. The engagement was not without cost, however. 1 Panzer 35T was knocked out after being struck by 2 76.2mm shells, likely fired by a T-34. By 26th of July, the division reported 17 tanks written off, while roughly a quarter of its remaining vehicles were undergoing repairs. Between the 29th of July and the 7th of August, the division was withdrawn from the front to rest and refit. Combat resumed shortly thereafter, and during the night of the 15th to 16th of August near Moloskovitso, Soviet artillery knocked out 3 additional Panzer 35T tanks. In late 1941, the 6th Panzer Division was reassigned to the drive on Moscow. By the 10th of September, the division had lost approximately 44 tanks. Maintaining the remaining vehicles was becoming increasingly difficult due to the chronic shortage of spare parts. The only practical solution was to cannibalize damaged and broken down tanks to keep others operational. At the same time, the supply of replacement vehicles had effectively dried up, making it impossible to replenish losses. By the end of October, only 35 Panzer 35T tanks remained operational. By then, the surviving vehicles had each covered an average distance of more than 12,500 kilometers, placing enormous strain on their mechanical components. The situation continued to deteriorate, and by the end of November, no operational Panzer 35T tanks remained in service with the division. Although a number were later repaired and returned to action, participating in the ultimately unsuccessful German offensive against Moscow, only a handful survived into early 1942, when the type was finally withdrawn from frontline service on the Eastern Front. It is also worth mentioning that, under German control, only a few variants of the Panzer 35T were developed. The most important of these was the Panzerkampfwagen 35T, a command tank variant. Based on the standard Panzer 35T, it was equipped with additional radio equipment and featured a prominent frame antenna mounted above the engine compartment. To create additional working space inside the vehicle, the hull-mounted machine gun was removed and its opening covered with a circular armored plate. Only a small number of tanks were converted to this configuration before the outbreak of the war. In March 1942, a decision was made to convert approximately 50 surviving Panzer 35T tanks into towing vehicles, designated Motorzugmittel 35T or Artillerieschlepper 35T. The conversion involved removing the turret and replacing it with a metal frame covered by canvas. A towing bar with a hook was also installed, allowing the vehicle to pull loads of up to 12 tons. Some of these converted vehicles later saw service on the Eastern Front. The turrets themselves were repurposed as static defensive positions across occupied Europe. These either retained their original armament or had their main guns replaced with machine guns. This concludes our video on the Panzer 35T. What are your thoughts on this Czechoslovak tank in German service? Could Germany have achieved the same early war successes without it? Let us know in the comments below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal. As always, we would like to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Schuford, Owen M., Pawa A., Ostrovsky, R. Rob, and Sopwith21. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.